Hey, Tony, how you doing, man?
Hi, Kevin.
My gosh, is this going to be a fun episode? Because this is a story about a friend of mine, Michael McLeer, actually better known as Mr. Kaves. And Mr. Kaves and me go way back. We're going to talk about how we met and how we got on the road together. 1995, they were sent out to be on the Warped Tour.
This episode, I learned a lot. And, you know, starving artists that work really hard and pay their dues, things are changing so fast in this part of the industry. I think a lot of you are going to learn a lot too.
And really what I try to tell my students a lot of time and people that it's your community. And a lot of the stuff we talk about is community, how you identify with the community. And him growing up in Bay Ridge, we're going to talk about that, how it all led to all these different things. And his being an artist, being a tattoo artist, and then all of a sudden, like opening a pizzeria in tribute to his community. And then we're going to end this episode in a really interesting way. That'll lead into episode 23.
We're bringing this to the light to a lot of people that this is kind of a Cinderella story here.
He's very true to his neighborhood in Bay Ridge in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
And his whole career has kind of emanated out of there. And he always brings it back to there. And that's why we call this episode The Lord of Brooklyn.
The story begins in Brooklyn, right? And it started, I guess I was an average kid until I was about, growing up in Brooklyn, born in Flatbush, Church and Troy. My mother grew up she was born and raised in Bay Ridge. We moved back to Bay Ridge when I was 10. My father and mother, they were breaking up. They went through like a divorce, and it was a very, it's for a 10-year-old kid. It's, you always hear about that. Like it's one of the worst things that could, happen to a child. And for my brother and myself, my little sister, it was pretty tough. It was pretty tough because my mom was a very beautiful woman, very, young Italian hippie chick, that had everything going for her. She was one of the, she had like movie star good looks, and in the neighborhood, they thought she was going places. And, but she fell in love young, kind of eloped. My father was a greaser, outlaw, kind of, Flatbush cat. And she was open, free-spirited Bay Ridge girl. And I guess it was kids having kids. And, it was mine, like for me to see her move back to Bay Ridge. And she was, we didn't have nothing. We had, we sat on milk crates, we had a little black and white TV and a lot of hand-me-downs. I think an aunt eventually gave us a couch, like a red velvet couch with the plastic covering on it. And we moved into this little apartment building in Bay Ridge on 92nd Street. And that's where she grew up. She grew up, they called her Little 92nd Street. Her older brothers were like neighborhood legends and athletes. And she hung out in the schoolyard on 92nd Street. And so then she returns to 92nd Street and Gelston Avenue. And we're in this like one bedroom apartment. And, it was tough to see her go through what she was going through. Like she, my parents were young and crazy, and they were full of life and full of like, the typical Brooklyn thing. They were tough and they were beautiful, and they surrounded us in music, and we had 45 collection and Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix. My father was into doo-wop, so Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers, and just all this music. And my grandmother, my nanny, came from a big family, Italian family, because the Cutroni family, and they were singers and dancers. So at a young age, my grandmother would tell us that she was going to, one day, she was going to move out to Hollywood, and that was her dream. And she would record records at Woolworths. So Woolworths, back in this 5 and dime store back in the neighborhood, you could record your own record. So she would record 45 records, and she was incredible. And then, it's one of those things where she met my grandfather out of World War II, Battle of the Bulge. He comes out of the army, wants to throw all his medals out, and, he's like, fuck this. And he goes and gets some work in Bay Ridge and meets my grandmother. And, just like a beautiful love story. And but she has to, you know, she turns into a housewife and she never achieves these Hollywood fantasies and this, but she always told us that she wrote the song Soldier Boy, and they stole it from her in a contest. So it was interesting, that stuff that gets put into your mind as a child, like the dreams and aspirations of being this Brooklyn kid to make good. So when my mother and father were divorced, I was kind of like, you know, I, as the oldest in the house, I felt like I had a duty and a job to take care of my mother. And, you know, you're 10 years old, but, you know, it's funny because I look at my 11-year-old daughter and I'm like, what, how could you have all this kind of baggage, right? Put on a little kid. But I don't know. I took that on. My mother would drag me down the welfare offices with her, and I was her little man. I was her protector. And she told me, you know, when she was on the line in you know, getting welfare in Bay Ridge, like, you were looked at as a really white trash if that was the story and you were on a welfare line. And when you went downtown Brooklyn, they would kind of abuse you because you're like, you know, you're this young, vibrant woman. Like, you know, why can't you provide for your kids? And she was just in a tough situation. She didn't want to take from her parents, and the parents didn't have much. It just was one of those things. She was a waitress and she was a server, and we were left home to kind of fend for ourselves in a way when she was at work. And so this is where the magic begins for me.
I had no idea about the complexity of, you know, a young divorce and young parents. And he says babies having babies, and what kind of an influence that had on his life and eventually his art, I imagine. And then his grandmother seems like a big influence too. And I immediately started singing Soldier Boy. I want to know what that story is too in a song contest. But you can see he's surrounded by young, energetic, artistic folks. It must have had a major influence on his art.
I mean, that energy of Brooklyn too. You know, he paints a great picture of what it was like back then. You know? We have that picture of it, you know, like the Saturday Night Fever. You know?
Oh yeah.
You know, and actually, I mean, one of his side hustles later on, we never really got into it in this interview, but when I first went and visited him in Brooklyn, he took me around and he was like, "Yeah, I used to run this thing. I'd take Japanese tourists and show them all the spots where Saturday Night Fever was filmed around Brooklyn in my caddy. You know, he played the part." And he would drive him around and show him. So he always was figuring things out. But let's see how he started picking up the brush.
I was lucky I moved on this block because this block had a group of kids that were part of a graffiti crew. And graffiti in New York City in the early 80s was starting to catch on like wildfire. And it was starting to, like, the late 70s, early 80s, this was like this renaissance of graffiti art in New York City, where it was starting to like make headlines because it was starting to like cross into galleries as well. But the train movement was a crazy movement. And these young kids on my block were like, yo, you know, they like, you got a tag. And, you know, we were, you know, after a while, you know, we're pop culture kids, you know, movies like The Warriors and Wild Style, like, introduced us to the idea of it. But when we met these kids on my block, we seen how organized it was. And it was like, you want to be accepted as well. So because I was autistic and I was really talented, I took to it like that. And I found, you know, magic in a magic marker. And there was a neighborhood kid that was like a local hero, a local legend. And this is an important thing. It's like, I, in my life, always found and searched out, maybe because my father wasn't in the house, I was always looking for mentors. Or you know, looking for, you know, I always had that thing is that you have to, if you want to be the best at something, you got to find the best. You got to, you know, you have to be humble and you have to, you know, learn. So this local legend in the neighborhood, he wrote RR. And my little kid sister was 10 years, more than 10 years younger than us. So my mother would have to hire a babysitter. And the babysitter lived on my block. Her name was Marianne. And the graffiti writer had a crush on Marianne. So when he would come visit Marianne, now I would be in front of my building, snot-nosed little kid, like painting in chalk practicing graffiti in the street. This was, this is where you practice. This is where you hung out in front of your building. There was like 40 wild kids running around my block. And there I was, drawing in the street. And he came up upon me and he was at, he knew who I was because of the babysitting thing. And he was just like, so you're trying to write graffiti, right? I'm like, yeah, I'm trying to find a name. And he was just like, well, you're in luck. Because my brother, Frankie, retired, and he's 15 years old. He's too old for graffiti, so he retired. I'm going to give you his name. So he handed down the name Kaves, Kavs to me, and I was knighted. I was like reborn. It was like baptized by fire in the street. Like boom, I had like a rebirth and like a reinvention on like, okay, now I just found like my path, like for a voice. So I put an E into the tag because I like the way Kaves sounded better than Kaves. And I said I was going to be one of the best graffiti artists that South Brooklyn ever seen. And I went to work.
Then it was all of a sudden, it was like the block wasn't, the block got a little small. So they started moving on to other things in their lives.
The older children would figure out the times and the schedules of the workers, right? And when you're mentored, they start to show you the ropes, like the trains that run in and out of the yard during, rush hour. The subway becomes your summer camp, and it's very dangerous, between the gangs and the cops and the third rail and everything else. But it becomes second nature to you, where it becomes your summer camp, and the subway lines become your social networking. So all these different lines is your internet at the time, because different neighborhoods had different writers. Different neighborhoods had different train yards, and they had something called a layup, where they would take the train out of service in the tunnels at after rush hour or before, and they would park them and hide them in the tunnels. And those would be very dangerous to go into, but that's where you would catch a train. And I was fortunate because when I was at a very young age, let's say about the time I was 12, turning 13. Let's say for one train car, it was New Year's Eve. So I told my mother, like, Mom, I'm going to go to a party. And 12 years old, what fucking New Year's Eve party are you going to go to? But yeah, I'm going to go to a party with my friends. She goes, who are you going with? I'm going with, this one and that one. She goes, I want you home, after the ball drops. But if you're going to be late, make sure you call me when the ball drops. So that was my instructions for New Year's. But that was a plan. We planned this whole car. So the idea was we found this layup, and I'm not going to say the name of the layup because you never know if you need to go back to that layup. But the layup was a train station underneath the train station. So they have old train stations in New York City subway that have multi-levels that they don't use. So this train was parked in the station. So you had to climb through a hole underneath the platform and jump down and pop in. And then you had in New Year's Eve, there's not a lot of cops on the beat. Everybody's partying, everybody's dropping it. So that was a great time to have like a 5-hour, 6-hour span of time. So myself and another writer, Money, EG, and Strider and Braze, were big graffiti writers, big legendary graffiti writers, painted these 2 whole car trains. And while we're down there painting, you could imagine all the aerosol and all the fumes. And you can get caught just by people smelling it up on the station. We're going to try to paint something that's monumental or something that other writers are going to be impressed by. But you know what? As soon as I looked at, the time, I was like, everybody, what time is this? Oh, it's like 5 to 12. I had to climb back up, go out to the hole, find a payphone to call my mother when the ball dropped to, say, I love you, Happy New Year. And she's like, when you coming home? I said, I'll be home soon. So, I went back down there and painted that train, and it rolled out the next morning. And the fellas finished it off. And yeah, that was something and that was for a 12-year-old, 13-year-old kid at the time. I just turned 13. It was a big feat, and it kind of it gave you your status. So the larger your status grew as a graffiti writer, the more attention you got, the more fame you got. So you kind of you're branding yourself at a young age on how to take your name and put it all over the city to become popular, to hence have opportunity.
The 80s, man. A 12-year-old, 13-year-old. No, that shit does not happen anymore. I remember crazy shit. I'm his same age. And so, yeah, you know, the street lights came on, all that jazz. But could you imagine that today? Just give me a call at midnight when the ball drops. As long as you say goodnight and then get home as soon as you can.
Yeah, you know, and as you're raising your profile on the streets amongst your peers, you're also starting to raise your profile with someone else.
The upside, you get all this fame. The downside is that the people know who you are, and so do the police, right? So eventually, you know, I had a pretty decent career. It went from like late 79, 1980 into 1985 on the subway cars, where eventually they were waiting for me in the yard.
No.
And they ended up getting me, at some point. And I was doing, the funny thing about that one is I was doing a whole car end to end with my partner Revs, and it made the newspaper the next day because when we got caught with my friend Kos, God rest his soul, he passed away last year. It made the newspaper as Vice isn't nice, 3 get brushed in the graffiti paint job. I was doing a whole car Miami Vice piece. I had Don Johnson with his gun on his Ferrari because Miami Vice was very popular at the time.
He remembers the headline too. That's hilarious. So I didn't realize the other train station he described when that whole night on New Year's, he was on the level painting a train, but that train eventually came out and got used. So that's how the whole city got to see his name.
And he's now traveling around the city and they're painting and they're doing their things.
Yeah.
And he starts coming around to another form of art.
As an artist, you can't just rest on your laurels. You have to like reinvent yourself and find a new way to create. And as a kid, I always consider myself an artist. When people say, what do you want to be when you grow up? But artists could be, you could have a multi-medium. And when the thing is that when I had to put down the spray can, I was like, well, how the hell am I going to like continue to do what I do? And that's the moment where I said, okay, we need to change it up. So maybe if I pick up this microphone, I could do what I'm doing with graffiti, but do it because at that point, rapping and MCing and hip hop. See, we were little B-boys. Because of the graffiti scene, we would go into different neighborhoods, and our friends, we had a small crew, and they were mostly consisted of us and black kids and Puerto Rican kids, because that's what graffiti writers, they're multicultural. And that's what you got when you went to other neighborhoods. You found friends in other neighborhoods, and usually economics plays a part of that too, because we're all broke kids, and we find other broke kids that are all trying to create something creative in New York City. So my boy Lask, Mike McDonald in Staten Island, and Troy Jenkins and Joey Hernandez, we became these, this crew of, and there's other kids as well in my neighborhood that I came up with. And one day I'll write a book or something and I'll mention all of them.
So all of a sudden he's like, okay, I'm going to pick up a microphone. We're going to hear about how he started bringing this to his neighborhood.
MCing and hip hop, well, obviously was another way to express yourself. And it was something that we were playing with, but it didn't become a reality until I found another mentor, right? Like, so another mentor was a local nightclub owner. And this is how we share in the background of being like working at nightclubs at early ages. I had to be, 17, 18 years old. When a local night, I was like 15, 16, I got caught. So that year I had to figure out what I was going to do, but a nightclub owner needed signs painted for his place. And they said, yo, Kaves is the cat that could paint your. He didn't know I was coming with spray paint. He was like, what is that? Where's your paintbrush? I go, don't worry about it. I get the job done with this. And his name was Ernie Barry. And he was this Boston, a guy that moved to New York. And he was like a vaudeville or like more like a crooner that played an accordion and was big on that circuit where he was like a Tony Bennett, like crooner. And he opened up this nightclub in Bay Ridge to do this music. And over time, he would bring disco acts, and it was like a nightclub where they would have performances. And he asked me to paint some signs, and I got to know him. And the thing about him was he was like on the hook with some gangsters that were holding his his
Line of
title to
credit.
his place that he was on the hook for. And he said, Mikey, I need to bring you, he goes, I don't know what it is about you. You always got all these kids hanging around you. We had a crew called the Verrazano Boys. It's like the Verrazano Boys, like, we need to bring kids here. Can you do something about it? And I was just like, well, let me see that talent list. There was a talent list that he had from Cara Lewis, her name was. She was a booking agent, right? Right. Cara Lewis. And he would book his acts through her. So when he gave me his sheet, like my brother was my brother's friend opened up a record store. My brother was DJing out of a record store. My brother was starting to DJ at the time too. That's how all this kind of stuff comes together. And I found a record that popped out on me, and it was a Public Enemy single. And when I seen the cover, these cats all dressed like gangsters and like in a parking lot with bags and Cadillacs, and I said, well, this reminds me of what goes on here, right? So when I played that song and put that needle to the groove and heard Rebel Without a Pause, there was like a eureka moment where I felt like, oh shit, I just found my rock and roll. I just found what my father and mother found with Led Zeppelin, and I found it with this record. And when Ernie Barry gave me that Cara Lewis list, Public Enemy was on the top. I said, I'm going to bring this group to Bay Ridge, and we're going to turn it out. And it was great because at the time Bay Ridge was it was still very segregated, and there was a lot of racial tension going on. This was like the year before Spike Lee wrote Do the Right Thing. There was a lot of angst, but we were hip hop kids, and we like young kids always know, like, we definitely felt like we didn't care about what the neighborhood, like the older people in the neighborhood felt. We had a scene. We were building a scene. We were true to our scene, and we were going to, put our money where our mouth was. We're going to start bringing these groups. And I convinced Ernie Barry to give me $3,000 to get Public Enemy to come there. And that started like magic. It started to blow up. I brought KRS-One there, Big Daddy Kane there, Biz Markie, Rest His Soul. I brought a lot of hip hop groups to this one little neighborhood and started making a scene there. And it was the first time these groups played in front of an all white audience, like strictly white audience. So where Public Enemy, Chuck D told me that, yeah, that was the first time we knew that like we had something like to cross over. So now I'm networking and I'm doing graffiti signs for the stages and doing the backdrops. So when the acts who this is, and I'm producing these shows, I am now like focused on, now we started a rap band. When Chuck D X's, we got a rap band. Of course, we got the best rap band there is in South Brooklyn. When we basically didn't know our ass from our elbow. Yeah, we didn't know our ass from our elbow. But you got to fake it till you make it. And my brother was DJing, and we started making beats with my friend Troy, and we ended up, like going out to Hempstead, Long Island, and bothering the shit out of Public Enemy to do a demo for us. Eventually, that happened. But this is how I started to network, and then started to dreaming about the Lords of Brooklyn and how we can make an impact in our and bring our own story and go get a record deal. Now I'm taking my art, and I'm also doing logos for other bands. So I'm taking everything I know, right? The graffiti, the street credibility that because at this point I already had fame as a graffiti artist. So I was taking whatever I knew, and I was networking, and eventually I found a guy named Kevin Maxwell, was an A&R at Tommy Boy Records, that had me do some artwork for them. And he said, yo, listen, there's a group coming in that's like you guys, that has a single that's going to blow up. And you guys should meet them because I think you'll get along with them. And that was the House of Pain.
Oh,
so when
cool.
I met Danny Boy at Tommy Boy, we hit it off because he was born in Brooklyn, and he wanted to know what Brooklyn was all about. And we hit it off. We became fast friends. And then he offered me to come on the road with them. And I went from carrying luggage to, getting a microphone. He got sick in Dublin. He got food poisoning, and I had to fill in his shoes with Everlast. And then I became a backup singer for them. And then I was added as a fourth member to the House of Pain. But under one rule is that I could still market the Lords of Brooklyn. I had the Lords of Brooklyn on my back, which we won the Warped Tour. And that got me in the door to be with a legitimate band that was making, they were double platinum at the time, where people started asking who the Lords of Brooklyn are.
But he told me he was good friends with House of Pain.
Right.
It flashed back, and I had to break it to him that Everlast in the band one time pulled a gun on Fran.
What?
Oh yeah, we were doing a show down at the Whiskey one night, and he had a girlfriend or something, and it's one of those relationships that I think they were fighting was part of their relationship,
Awesome.
and drama. So there was drama going on, and I was parked behind the Whiskey. I was working the show, and Fran was with me, and they were arguing in the parking lot and fighting. And Fran, of course, being who she is, she steps in, and he pulled a gun on her.
Jesus Christ.
And so when he told me that story, I was like, he's a great friend of yours? Well, this is like, it was kind of like and then it turned out for a while here, Everlast lived right around the corner.
No.
He actually got married over at the country club.
Really?
Yeah. So Kaves stayed at our house. So it was like this whole kind of, don't bring him over here. Sort of like, I didn't need that back in life, but you really thought Kaves was on his way. He started doing, some great stuff, but then, he'll tell us about a moment in time that wasn't so great.
We got right when I got on the road with the House of Pain and things were looking up. My mother would be bragging to all her friends. I used to have coffee with my mother every morning, talking about the dream, about the plan. And, my mother was bragging to all her friends that we were going to do it. We were going to, she took a lot of shit because we were, in a lot of people's eyes, we were punk kids. And she never stopped believing in us. And, I was supposed to get a deal with Polygram Records through a production deal with House of Pain, but it fell through. So that was like we were really upset about that. But I never give up. So right after that, Jim Carrey movie from Mask called us to do a track for their soundtrack. So I went to California, and when I came back from there, there's people interested in giving us a record deal. But when I came back from California on the Red Eye, I stayed at my girlfriend's house at the time, Donna, and my brother went back home. And I was I was going through some really big drama at home. I had a stepfather that that it wasn't good. And I was forced to move out. So my mother was just in the process with Donna to fix up a little apartment for me. And, that's a long story. We can go into detail another time, but they went out to get us breakfast, and we were supposed to hook up because we just got back from doing this song for this movie, and she wanted to hear all about it. And my mother dropped off my little brother at school. My brother was 6 years old, my younger brother, because my mother had two more children after, with her second marriage. And she went to go get us bagels, and some of the mother would go, "Oh, my sons are home. I'm going to go get them." And she went to go get me a drain stop for my new apartment because I haven't seen my new apartment. She fixed it up. Donna and her painted it. They put tiles down. It was such a shitty little apartment. But for me, it was the world, right? And, she went to the store and she never came back. She was killed by a hit and run with my little sister that was 4 years old. And she was about 43, 42 years old. And we lost our biggest cheerleader, our biggest reason for doing what we did. And it changed our lives. And you could imagine it really shook everything that we had, because everything that we knew, came to that point where it just got destroyed. And it really took us like some real soul searching to say, okay, we can't let them die in vain. The Lords of Brooklyn has to happen now, and we have to move on and carry on. And then, Amanda came through with that deal with Rick Rubin, and we got signed to American Records, and we had our record came out. Saturday Night Fever was the first single, and All in the Family was the record. And we got, our biggest thing was we thought we were going to be, our career could have ended on that note, right? Of getting the deal. I mean, for us, the odds were so great against us getting on Video Music Box with Ralph McDaniels. It was like a local video show. We thought we did it. We're like, that was it. Like, but obviously, it just was where the ride begins.
Wow.
Yeah, it's we hear a lot about here.
4-year-old sister.
Yeah, sister. They were hit by a hit and run driver, and
Jesus.
one of the things he had done, and it's been there for ages, was a mural of his sister and his mother, and it's been on the side of a building forever. And then all of a sudden, De Blasio in the last year or something decided, I want to clean up the city, and had the mural painted over. And it was a beautiful piece of art. Now it's like my life's intersected with him not too long later.
Yeah.
I asked him, how'd you end up out on that first Warped Tour? They played the first show.
Yeah.
They were out there in New York with me in 1995.
We heard about this tour that was the first tour of its kind that had a skateboard ramp, and it was like a skateboard tour, and it was a punk rock tour. And we were like, yo, that sounds cool. Let's but it's in a parking lot. You know what I mean? We're like, you want to play the fucking parking lot? We were like, all right, whatever. Like, get in the Cadillac, get the boys together. We got the Seamus and the crew and the boys and the Cadillacs, and we rolled out with our leather jackets on and our fedoras, and it was like the middle. I know it was like the middle of the summer. Like, welcome to the Warped Tour. It's gonna be very fucking hot anytime you hear the Warped Tour. Think of like extra hot, like playing, and we're there with the leather jackets on, and we're doing our thing. But we get to meet you and the other group we got to meet that found out they were fans of ours was Sublime, and that became where they offered us from that to go on tour with them for the 3-Ring Circus tour that became pretty legendary with Wesley Willis, us, and Sublime, and we really got to go out to California and really go through those deep cuts in California and hang out with Sublime. And that was pretty amazing. And we wish we got to stay on the Warped Tour, but that was our introduction. It was one and done, one show, but I guess we left some sort of impression on you, right?
Trust me, at this point, we're just hanging on. Like Warped Tour, first year, 95, we were just barely hanging on.
Right.
And it was like, we're getting there, and all of a sudden, somehow it was like, hey, can these guys jump on that local show? At that point, sure. And they came out, it was a day also I sent I'm glad he met Sublime before later in that day when I kicked him off the tour and sent him home for a while.
You guys were both just kids at the time.
Yeah, but I sent Sublime home later that day. So I'm glad he met him in the morning, because I don't know if he would have had that opportunity when I think back upon it.
Like he said, that for him, that moment was just the beginning. They thought they had arrived, but
right.
It sounds like everybody's career, there's a long road.
Yeah, so let's hear about that road right now.
A lot of these record labels would only give you one shot to get up at bat, unless a record label really, really invested a lot of money and time into you. I mean, the deals were considerable deals, but we had something that we kept on getting deals because the music was good. But the deal is like, at the time when they were trying to break the Lords of Brooklyn, Warner Brothers what was on the charts at the time was Nirvana, was super huge. And then it was like Snoop Dogg. So try to break a band like the Lords of Brooklyn. Is it hip hop? Is it rock? Is it this? Is it that? It's not easy for to wrap your head around to get that radio play. I mean, we became pretty huge overseas, and that's what happens in Japan and Europe. And our single got moderate success, but we didn't get the radio success that, let's say, the House of Pain got or some of our other peers. And the labels that they only gave you one shot, it wasn't like multiple singles and working in the record. You got one shot to work a single, and if the single didn't jump the way it popped off, you became a write-off. And if, you became, I don't think it's going to work. And for young kids, it fucks you up, because you spend your life coming into this record, right? Like you write in your heart and your soul, and you got so much riding on it in your neighborhood, and your neighborhood's behind you. And then they give you one shot up the bat. I'm like, come on, man.
There's people that have created incredible art that have an opportunity to allow themselves to grow. But, it's a business, it's a music business, and people are going to put money behind stuff that they're going to have a return on their investment. So is it fair? No. Is it reality? I totally understand where he's coming from.
Quite a few years went by. And I hadn't really heard about Lords of Brooklyn or what was going on. Then all of a sudden I asked him, like, how did we reconnect?
A lot of people out there, if you know Kevin Lyman, he answers his calls. And I think I pleaded my case real fast to you. And I think whatever, if we left any kind of impression on you from just being on your first one, you're loyal because you're like, you are my first one, come out, we'll find a place for you. And come out, find a place for you. Might be a tent. It might be, might be in front of the venue. It might be any of these things, but you always give a shot to people that you are loyal to. And so we got into Winnebago. We raised some capital from a friend that was on Wall Street, $50,000 in a Winnebago. And we went out to the Warped Tour and we had a new record that we put together, and that was it. We added a band to our lineup, and we went out there. And I think our friendship and relationship was built on you were watching us work hard, and you were like, oh, these guys work their asses off. And I think another thing about the Warped Tour, people know about this about Kevin, is Kevin gives you a choice. And this is the choice. The choice is like this. It's like you can wake up at the crack of ass and meet me here to find out where I can put you on a stage that I might have room for you. If you're not here and you're not doing the work, I got no time. I can't waste my time. There's other bands that I have to pay attention to. So I would make sure that I would get up and get over there. And then also the kind of street marketing. We would make posters. We would make whatever we had to do. Fucking trucker hats. We would paint trucker hats. We sat in tents and we were like, humble, man, like major record bullshit. The egos were out the door. We were like back to grassroots marketing. We went back to like painting graffiti on trucker hats to pay for the gas. And we really embraced the soul of the tour. And like groups like Rancid were like, they would remember, like groups that knew of the Lords of Brooklyn were giving us shout outs on the main stage, and they were welcoming us into this punk rock tour. And I felt it was pretty cool. And I felt it was pretty punk rock that a hip hop band was on a punk rock tour. And I think, we definitely made our impression. And then, you invited us back a couple of times by hook or crook. And we found a home and a family there. And my friendship with you so brings me back to the mentor things, like finding you as a friend and the mentor. It just really, it really brought back the faith that I had in the business, humanity, and finding a dear friend in you and learning from you on how to work maybe 10% of the country instead of trying to work, think about the fucking whole globe. Like you were like, find the core, find 10% of people that are real, and work it, and we'll see what happens.
We started becoming good friends, and it was almost like fun. He'd ride on my bus quite a bit. He had this motorhome with all his the buddies, but he'd somehow fall asleep on my bus a lot. So we were hanging out.
It was the most comfortable bus.
But we ended up becoming friends, and I was almost like, it was like a challenge for him because I was learning from him because I'm always interested in like that city lifestyle. I grew up in Southern California, so we would talk about that, which later turned into me coming out one time, and I said, I want to throw a block party in Brooklyn. That's like one of my goals.
That'd be great.
So I literally had him get me a barbecue. He had to find a place to rent a barbecue, and in front of one of his other businesses, we set up like literally on a Saturday afternoon, and back then, the cops knew everyone, so they threw a few barricades up in front of the street, like unofficially, and we had this block party.
So you had your block party dream because of him. That's
and I was
cool.
like sending his kids to the store. You knew they were like little Kaves because I'd give them 20 for 2 packs of hot dogs, and they come back and go, I go, where's the change? And they go, no, that's what it cost. It was like, so we had, but this friendship we had went both ways. So all of a sudden I'm like, I'm going to take Kaves whitewater rafting. Oh, we're going to take Kaves skydiving. Oh, we're going to take Kaves, like all these outdoor adventures. I taught him how to fish. I got him outside.
Well, he said that in the segment. He really saw you as a mentor. And I've heard this as a reoccurring theme from you and your lessons learned over your career. And he said it. And he said it slightly here. You told him to go find that 10%.
Yeah.
He understood he needed to find for his group and his art, that niche, that would really appreciate his group and his art. He said that just there, and you taught him that. So I think that served him well. It took a long time getting there.
Yeah.
But he found his tribe, right?
It served him very well. And we'll be finding out how well a little later in the episode. But at this point, I was like a mentor or a disciplinarian. I wasn't, my demographic, so I was aging up a bit. My crowd was staying real young. So it was always fun to have someone that you could also talk about your family and some of those other things you could do.
And there's just people on the road and people you meet in life that just click.
After a few years, we had a little other discussion, I guess.
As I started getting older, and I think one year, it was a tough pill to swallow. When you told me, I mean, like you would let me ride your bus, and we would hang out and talk at night. You had a tough thing of telling your friend, like, hey, you're aged out for this tour, and you probably need to start thinking about where your career is going to go when the music's over. And it was hard. It was hard for me to hear it, because the dream is always the music, right? We always put the music, but then I was saying to myself, why am I trying so hard in the music when my graffiti art and my art comes so easy to me, and I'm like, you don't, like, the music's always going to be there for you, but your art is what, is something that never failed you. So I started painting again and really going in on canvas and really honing my work as a fine artist and a graffiti artist. And the opportunities started opening up for me, and started to really people, instead of chasing the dream was coming to me, and it was starting to, like, I put 20 years into tattooing and over 40 years in 40 years in graffiti, 42 years in graffiti. But now the fruits of that labor started to, come around, with big brands coming to, get at me. I forgot to mention that some of the businesses when we had the Lordz of Brooklyn in the beginning, the way I marketed the Lordz of Brooklyn was on graffiti on T-shirts. We had the first graffiti store in New York City by graffiti writers called BMT Lines, which onto itself was the beginning of the street and the whole streetwear stuff that was popping off in New York. We were one of definitely, and you can count them on their hands, we definitely made our mark as street, like with our clothing brand. So we had that store as well that we had for a while as the Lordz of Brooklyn grew in success. That store was a big part of it. And so streetwear brands, we did tons of that stuff. And then later on, Beaujolais Nouveau, the famous French holiday wine, I was the first graffiti artist to do their label. And then Aston Martin and Jaguar.
Awesome.
AP watches. I mean, so I've been very fortunate to kind of find my way with the paintbrush and spray can again.
Aston Martin and Jaguar, he did these beautifully custom cars for them. And at one point they gave him a car to drive around Brooklyn for a year.
What?
Yeah, it was like pretty cool deal. It was a pretty good deal for him.
Be a graffiti artist.
And during this time, he's also, now he's like, he's got the tattoo shop, and he's working, and people were starting to look to him to, charities and things for his art. He's been very generous with that throughout the years.
I've always seen you give more than you get. And I think eventually it just comes back to you. And like years back, I was asked to sit on the board of the Jam Master Jay Foundation, and Run DMC were our childhood idols. So I did that for quite a few years. In the Jam Master Jay Foundation, trying to find money for inner city schools for the music programs. And then I just did God Love We Deliver. I just had an auction of a art cow that was sold for $22,000, which went to that organization. So that was a great success.
Then it's all of a sudden, he's now got children of his own, but he's like, okay, the next phase of their life now we're entering,
Mm-hmm.
and of their children getting older. And the next venture he did had a lot to do with one of his children.
This is all stuff like the creative energy's going, and I always try to give back. So I opened, at one point, my son asked me about his future, and my son was, turning he's getting up there where he was going to college. And I said, what are you going to do? I thought maybe he was going to be, following my footsteps as somewhat, my ego, right? But he said he wanted to be a chef because he was always he was always really inspired by our Sunday dinners, making meatballs and sauce and everything. And I said, well, that's pretty cool because I've always wanted, I've always had this fantasy of perhaps doing something with food, or maybe a speakeasy or something to go with the tattoo shop. Or, I'm an old soul, so I always romanticize it like something old school. But when I had when an old restaurant in my neighborhood there was a very famous restaurant that was like a neighborhood icon that was up for sale. And it was a Lento's Pizzeria. It was a family operated restaurant from 1933. There goes, I was like, nah, I think I would love to jump in and do a pizzeria. Right. So, found some cats that wanted to get down and opened up this pizzeria. And Kevin, when it comes to all of these businesses and being an entrepreneur all these years, the restaurant business has to be the toughest business.
Yeah.
Because it's a production. And this from the Warped Tour. Warped Tour maybe second. Warped Tour, how many shows you produce in one summer. The restaurant, you have to produce this every night and it never stops. You get one day off and it's a production that never stops. So designing it, creating it, coming up with the recipes. Yes, I'm an art director. That's what I do. But when it came to operations, it really took a toll. Where it was one of the toughest things I ever did, But I was lucky that I had support of the neighborhood because I've been loyal to my neighborhood all these years. I had support of my family, and it became a family-operated restaurant when I brought my kid sister that was managing an Italian restaurant for 20-something years. I brought her into the restaurant. My son got out of CIA school for cooking. He got back in the kitchen, and he's been slinging the craziest pizzas for the last couple of years now. So this week, the 12th, is our 5th anniversary for the Brooklyn Firefly. One of my highlights with the restaurant was to see you and Fran walk in that door on opening night. You definitely overwhelmed me with the love and support for you guys to take a trip out there and be there.
How was that? You didn't know you went to the opening. What was that like?
We didn't tell anyone we were coming. I think we told Peter, his friend Brooklyn Pete, and we just showed up at the front door.
Oh, that's great.
It was super fun. And you heard earlier he mentioned Donna, who fixed up that first apartment. Right. Well, Donna became his wife.
Oh, cool.
And they've been together. And they have 4 children and raising them. And they're 4 diverse people that have a little bit of each of them. But Donna is referred to as the saint from Fran, being the saint behind and helping it, because you could see with Kaves, he had a lot of things in his mind, a lot of
balls in the air.
They were going through some old photos, and they looked at the photos, and Kaves saw something, and it brought it to Donna's attention.
After all these kind of like years of doing this shit, she's become an incredible editor. So she was a graphic designer by trade, and then she did all the Lordz of Brooklyn stuff. But when I needed to do music videos when we were on our own independently, she turned around and learned how to edit and built herself to be a brilliant. She's working with Sasha Jenkins now, which is he's a lifelong friend. That's a great director. But Donna's been editing, and she's been doing really amazing at it. So she's found her thing, A friend Jojo sent me a photograph last night of me breakdancing in like 86th Street was the busy part of the neighborhood where I used to put cardboard out with a hat and collect money and breakdance. You see in the picture all the way to the right, there's a crowd around me, and you see this little girl watching me. This is 3 years before I met her, and she's there in the crowd watching me. And so she's been having my back and supporting me since 1986. We got together, and she's been the secret weapon really behind all what we do.
Donna is one of the amazingly talented people I know. She edits, she learned all this stuff herself. And I wanted to get her in this episode a little bit because they've done a song called The Brooklyn Way. Mm-hmm. And we talked about what the Brooklyn Way is. The Brooklyn Way is getting it done, whether you have the means to do it or not. It's sort of figuring it out, any means, by hook or by crook,
doing it on your own and just getting through it and getting it done. That's the Brooklyn way.
Kind of like our television show.
Yeah, just get it done,
Just do it, man.
He's got, music, there's pizzerias, there's this. But there was this project that he had started a long time ago that's going to lead into almost the next episode. But we're going to touch on this a little bit. And he's going to talk about these characters he created.
In between record deals 20 years ago, I'm sitting in the pizzeria and I'm doodling on a napkin. And I'm always, first love, passion was cartoons. And any kid that's an artist will tell you 20 cartoons that shaped their life. I was doodling these little characters at the time. And if I was inspired by the Sopranos or the Munsters, this was something I created, and it was called the Family Mooks. And I did it. And at first, I was figuring out how I can get it done. I thought it was going to be a brand for an Italian ice or something. I thought, I was trying to figure out how. So eventually, Mass Appeal magazine put it in as a comic strip in the back of the magazine. Sasha put it in there. And, it was incredible because it was this cartoon, this gangster cartoon, this dysfunctional gangster cartoon that part mobsters, part monsters. And I tried my best at the time, shopping it and doing all that stuff, trying to get a show for it. And it was one of those things, like, again, I was ahead of my time, ahead of the curve. And I got discouraged because I had it for a couple of years, like working it hard. And I put it away in the drawer of Kaves ideas. And I got a lot of them, like Ralph Cramden. I got a lot of ideas, but I always loved the Mooks. And it was a passion project that I felt like I could never put down. So every once in a while, I open up the drawer and I take out the Mooks. I'll draw a new character, come up with a new idea. So then I had a friend and myself, we started writing again. And I'm like, okay, maybe this has a shot that, and I shopped it again and it's still ahead of its time. And man, all these years later, I have an attorney and a family friend that's been friends in our family for a very long time, been very supportive of my career. He had a group of gentlemen that he brought to me that said they want to meet you. They're really impressed by, your art and who you are. And when they told me about the NFT platform, I heard a lot of, I heard a lot of this stuff going, oh, it's this, it's that, it's a pyramid scheme. It's just, I was trying to, but when they came and discussed, when they really broke it down to me and it opened up this dialogue for a new narrative. And I'm a storyteller, Brooklyn folklorist. I'm like, when I seen that this was a key into a way to tell a new narrative and where the artist has control and the artist is directly attached to their collector, I said, man, you cut out all the bullshit and the middlemen and the gatekeepers. And so this company, Doodle Labs, these Brooklyn guys created this company, this NFT company. And when I pulled out the Mooks, I said, this isn't about Kaves. This is something about, it's a little bit more about, it's for everyone. It's broader. It's more, and they fell in love with it. And I said, wow, to bring the Mooks back to life now on this platform, this could tell the story of the Mooks, and God knows where it can go, because now the NFT collector becomes part of the story and it becomes more immersive. And there's all these options because this is where the future is going. And if you're not, you should really look into it because it's a lot more than just selling art digitally on the it's a lot bigger once you really wrap your head around. Because I have kids and I see what they're doing. My 14-year-old is wants to be a programmer. He's talking about the metaverse. He's talking about, I got an 11-year-old that's TikToking and and we were hip hop and punk rock and people said we were crazy, right? Mm-hmm. Like these things, it was finally, I felt like after COVID, when I started doing drawing the Mooks at home, I felt finally the time is right. But I feel like the timing is there. So they really felt incredible about it. You can go to OpenSea and you could even buy in the secondary market. So they were like, no, believe us, this thing is going to go over. And when they told me that they're building it out of a small community of only 2,000 people, I thought of the Warped Tour. I was like, you have a small community that holds this much influence and power. I said, yo, you don't have to tell me anymore, because I'm like, this thing could be something that could be incredible. So I was always hoping and dreaming that, wow, this could be something, but I didn't think it was going to be as something as when it hit.
Okay, so that's the big tease. All right, tell me, what's the big hit? Come on, why we stop it there? Don't stop it there.
I wanted to actually ask Matt Dweck from Doodle Labs, like, what attracted, this is a new thing that a lot of...
like, why were they so attracted? Why did he say, even the artist needed to be convincing. Doodle Labs said, you don't get it. This is going to go. And he's like, how?
But he hit on that sense of community. And that's what now it started resonating with me as I've been trying to figure this out and learning more and more. It's about hyper servicing a community. It's how do you, and it goes back to me telling bands, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, sitting in front of my bus, I go, the goal is at that point is to have 100,000 fans.
Right.
And if you could figure out how to monetize 10% of those fans, whether they buy a single for $1, buy a ticket, buy a piece of merchandise. If you could figure out how to monetize 10% of your fans a month, you're going to have a great career. All you need is 100,000 music fans. You don't need to have these millions in mass marketing, hyper servicing the fans. And really, that's what we're going to start talking about here. But let's, ask Matt, what attracted him and Doodle Labs to Mr. Kaves.
Kaves was introduced to us through a mutual acquaintance that we had. And we were lining up some artists. Our platform was going to be releasing one new project a month. And then I sat down and met with Mr. Kaves, and I loved his story and I loved his history. And I really felt there was just so much there to be told. And when you release an NFT, it's about the art, but it's also about the story. And we got introduced, and Kaves really dove into this right away. When we explained to him the NFTs, and he came up to our office, and I walked him through the history of the NFTs, and I showed him the CryptoPunks, which are like the first NFTs ever made, and then I took him to Art Blocks' site, and I showed him the Bored Apes Yacht Club, and it really all connected for him. And he said, "Yeah, we're going to build a community, and I can interact with my collectors." And he said, I have this project, the Family Mooks, that I created a little over 20 years ago. And I'm like, what's a mook? I don't know. I don't know what a mook is. And then he's like, why don't you come up to my studio and I'll show you. And I walked into his studio, and he had this painting that he had done of the Family Mooks over 20 years ago. And I said, wow, this is something. And from there, we worked together to create and bring the Family Mooks to life.
That's what we're going to explore in the next episode, Tony, like where this all went, because it was life-changing in many ways.
And it makes me curious as to how that bodes for the future, not just for artists in this world, but image artists, but I'm talking musicians and actors. I mean, this is cross-transcending to every art form.
And I think that's what we're trying to figure out right now, where it's going to fit. And I think in the next episode, we're going to explore that. Kaves had a few parting words before we left.
I've always been close to the street, and to be relevant in music and art, you have to be. But at the same time, you love a lot of people, you lose a lot of people, and it's been tough. And this was something that just definitely, it came together, and it was a blessing, but really a lot of hard work for many, many years. So, we're fortunate, and I'm just kind of like, I'm pinching myself, but it gives me now the freedom to really keep being creative, and that's what it gives you. It gives you, another shot to keep doing your thing.
I want the next episode. I want to know what happened.
I want to just, thank, everyone, that joined us on this. It was great for me to hear that story. I even picked up little things that I didn't know about him. And I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about my friend Kaves, Tony.
Very cool.
And if you ever get to Brooklyn, of course, drop by the Firefly.
Is he still in town? He was here last night, right?
Yeah, he was over. Yeah, he'll probably be
right
over
on
this afternoon, but I think we're just going to have a little, chill because there's a lot of people here last night. And yeah, we're going to try to hang out and
Constantly party.
super fun. And then, yeah, we're going to get into the next episode. So I'd like to thank our producer, Xavier Bradley.
Who was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed this morning here on time.
I know he was like, it scared me. He came in the back door. I was like barely up, like opening the door. And
Beata is here too.
Beata's sitting over there.
Hi.
Enjoying the morning. And Vivian's out there somewhere. And and we always like to say,
Thank you, Diego, for the music, kid. Take it away!